My stepmother, Carol, didn't wait for the dirt to settle on Dad's coffin before she handed me the eviction notice, sealed with a mocking lipstick kiss on the corner. It was 40 degrees Fahrenheit in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the kind of biting late November chill that seemed to seep directly into your bones, and I was standing on the porch of the house where I grew up, clutching a cardboard box containing the last 6 months of my father's life, his favorite coffee mug, and the cruelest piece of paper I had ever seen. The lawyers and cousins had already peeled away, leaving only Carol and me. She leaned against the doorframe, adjusting the pearl necklace Dad bought her, her face a mask of practiced, fragile grief that cracked only to reveal a triumphant sneer. "Don't bother calling the bank, sweetheart," she purred, her voice low enough that the pallbearers wouldn't hear. "The accounts were closed this morning. To clear out your trash. You have exactly 30 for trespassing. For 30 years, that house on Maple Street had been my sanctuary. Even after I moved out for college, Dad always insisted I keep my room. It was the unspoken promise of home." Carol had arrived 5 years ago, a whirlwind of blonde hair and feigned devotion, just as Dad started showing the first signs of the leukemia that would eventually claim him. Because I desperately wanted Dad to be happy in his final years, maybe willfully. But Carol, she didn't want him happy. She wanted his substantial business portfolio and the legacy he had built. The subtle changes began about 18 months ago. Dad, usually meticulous about his finances, suddenly seemed confused by paperwork. He stopped checking the mail, claiming his eyes were tired. "My little life Carol handles it all now." I remember the first genuine tremor of dread the day I offered to pay for a new orthopedic chair he needed. He frowned, looking genuinely worried. "Oh, honey, don't worry about it. Carol says we need to be very careful with liquidity right now. It's tied up in that new trust she set up. Dad, careful with money? Never. He was generous to a fault." My suspicion grew into a dull trust or the missing bank statements. Every time I tried to talk to him out of nowhere, offering him tea or distracting him with a trivial medical question. She was a master of interception. Her manipulation was insidious, never a direct block, always a gentle redirection, making me feel like the cold, calculating daughter questioning his beloved wife's generosity. After she slammed the door on me, the finality of my isolation hit me like a physical blow, the one that made my throat seize. The eviction notice was handwritten on embossed stationery. It wasn't about the house. It was pure malice. "Look at you, freezing, pathetic and alone. You can't even afford a bus ticket out of this city. No wonder your mother left. You are worthless." The words scorched my eyes, blurring the sight of the street. I dropped my box on the wet lawn. Dead. The cold, I tried to mentally access my old emergency savings account, the one I'd set up years ago, separate from my current living expenses, just enough for a cheap motel and a flight out. I remember Dad teaching me the routing number by heart. But I didn't need the number, I needed the password, and Carol had somehow found a way to lock me out of everything tied to my father's legal address. I sat down hard on the curb, 35 years old, college-educated, but in that moment I was a discarded child, penniless and paralyzed by shock. I hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. The cold was unbearable. I knew Carol was watching through the lace curtains, sipping her tea, savoring her victory. I must have been there for 15 minutes, clutching the cruel note when the rumble started. It wasn't the sound of a neighbor's sedan. It was deep. I looked up through tear-filled eyes through the pavement as a massive Harley-Davidson pulled to a stop directly in front of the house. The rider was enormous, clad entirely in worn black leather, the back of his vest emblazoned with the notorious winged skull of the Hells Angels. He looked like the physical manifestation of everything my mother had warned me about. He cut the engine. The resulting silence felt louder than the roar. He slowly lifted his mirrored visor, salt and pepper underneath, and his eyes, surprisingly blue, were fixed on me. He didn't look angry or predatory. He looked concerned. "You're going to catch pneumonia sitting on that concrete, kid," he rumbled, his voice gravelly, but surprisingly gentle. And unless I miss my guess, you just came from a burial, not a joyride. Hand. The biker dismounted fluidly. I could only point his movements betraying a surprising grace. The eviction notice crumpled in my shaking. He walked slowly toward me, stopping only when he reached my dropped box. He picked up the coffee mug, studied the cruel note that had fallen out, and then looked back at the house, specifically at the lace curtain that snapped back into place too quickly. George was my friend, he said, his voice hardening slightly. Times the best damn mechanic I ever knew. He held out the note to me, but his gaze was locked on the house. That woman who just slammed the door on you, that Carol. Did she think I wouldn't notice George hadn't returned my calls for 6 weeks? Did she think I wouldn't show up to pay respects to the only man who ever treated me like family? He folded the note neatly and tucked it into the pocket of his vest. His eyes, now focused on the paralyzing cold, held a promise that sent a shiver. What's your name, unexpected? Emily, I whispered. Emily, he repeated, nodding once. My name is Grizz. And in this part of Tulsa, when someone does a kindness to one of ours, we pay it back. When someone steals from one of ours, we make sure they pay too. He looked toward the house one last time, a dark, calculating look in his eyes. We need to talk about what exactly that snake just stole from you. What exactly that snake just stole from you? We need to get you warm, fed. Mrs. Truck smelled faintly of burnt oil and something metallic, like spent gunpowder, but it was the warmest place I'd been in hours. He didn't drive me far, just a few blocks past the dead railway tracks in North Tulsa to a building that looked like a fortified warehouse, unmarked and utterly silent. Inside, he handed me a steaming mug of black coffee, his eyes boring into mine. They were the color of cold river stones, sharp and utterly without pity for the man I used to call Mark. That snake, Mark. He didn't just steal money, Grizz. I finally managed, my voice still shaking. I wrapped my hands around the mug, trying to anchor myself in the present. He stole the drive, the one with cooking the books, for years. I explained how not just minor fraud, my fiancé, this was full-scale embezzlement involving shell companies and several had been powerful silent partners. I had found the encrypted USB drive hidden behind a loose baseboard panel only a week ago. That shock, that stomach-dropping realization that the man I slept beside was a criminal had immediately turned into panic. I'd copied the data, hidden the original drive in a place I thought only I knew, and planned my escape. Spine Mark, being Mark, must have found the faint scratch on the baseboard, realized the original was gone, and assumed I was next. He hadn't bothered chasing me first. He'd gone straight for the book. Grizz listened without blinking, occasionally scraping the edge of his thumbnail across the table. When I finished, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant whine of a siren. Grizz stated, his voice knows you have the copy, but he can't prove it, or he suspects. What he needs is the original or confirmation that the copy is destroyed so he can keep his silent partners happy. He'll come back. And he did. Not physically, not at first. Mark started the slow, calculated emotional torture. The text began 12 hours after I landed at Grizz's safe house. Emily, please. I need to talk. Are you? I'm worried this is all a misunderstanding. The police are going to be involved if you don't answer. Then, the escalation. He played the concerned fiancé perfectly. Every word was designed to chip away at the guilt and doubt he knew I still carried, despite the evidence. I didn't answer. I just watched his pattern unfold, exactly as Grizz predicted. Mark was desperate but careful. He was still showing up for work, maintaining the facade. Even the old bakery started driving past the usual spots. He wasn't just searching for me. He was projecting control. We need proof he's looking for the drive, not just you, Grizz said one night, spreading a map of our old neighborhood across the table. He's too smart to break down the door, but he has to check the hiding spots he missed. The key is in the storage unit you shared. The unit was full of inherited junk. Keeping it because he said it was safe. Tax files from 5 years ago. I knew exactly where Mark had insisted on emergency kit, taped behind a heavy antique armoire, hidden by a layer of protective plastic. If he was truly desperate for the original drive or searching for my copy, he would be checking that spot to make sure his other secrets were still safe. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. Grizz acquired a high-definition, military-grade with silent infrared night vision, used by... The next night, under the cover of a thick fog rolling in off the Arkansas River, we drove Mark's beat-up old Honda, which Grizz had borrowed from the impound lot, to the storage facility on the outskirts of Broken Arrow. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I slipped the key into the lock. The air inside the unit was stale, smelling of dust, using a small, specialized jammer to block the facility's security feed for precisely 90 seconds. I worked. I had to move the armoire, which weighed a ton, straining every muscle in my back. Behind it, just as I remembered, was the cavity. Grizz had prepared the camera perfectly, camouflaged inside a broken plastic toolbox. I mounted it, angling the lens toward the cavity,
3 days
securing
it with
construction adhesive.
I existed in a state of suspended animation,
57
jumping
seconds.
at every ring of the burner phone
Grizz had given me. Mark's messages had turned aggressive. "You have 24 hours to tell me where you are. I know you took something important, Emily. Don't push me." The fear was crippling, but the knowledge that I had set the trap was a dull, satisfying ache. On the fourth morning, Grizz walked into the room without a word, he said, carrying a ruggedized laptop. His jaw. I held my breath, leaning over his shoulder. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed Mark, unshaven and twitchy, arriving at 3:17 a.m. He was wearing dark clothes, moving quickly and professionally, clearly paranoid about the motion sensors. He didn't even turn on the light, relying only on the beam of a small, tactical flashlight. Exposed the cavity. He went straight for the armoire. He tore away the plastic sheeting and started frantically searching the back wall, his movements jerky, desperate. He was looking for something I hadn't taken. Then the focus of the camera shifted slightly as he bumped the tripod. He swore under his breath, a low, guttural sound I barely recognized. He paused, his breath fogging the air, and pulled a small flash drive baggie out of the hidden recess. It was a small plastic evidence bag containing a single tarnished silver earring. The kind of earring Sarah, his former intern who had vanished 6 months ago after threatening to expose his initial scheme, always wore. My gasp was silent, lost in the hum of the laptop fan. Mark didn't just steal money, he was holding evidence of something far worse. He held the earring up to the light, dark, turning it over between his thumb and forefinger. But that wasn't the worst part. He took out his phone and made a call, lowering his voice until it was almost a conspiratorial whisper. The camera's microphone, incredibly sensitive, picked up every syllable. "It's not here," Mark hissed into the phone. "She must have the copy, but relax. The evidence is secured. I just found the backup for the Sarah problem. I told you I handle my loose ends." Desperate fiancé. He didn't sound like sounded like a predator closing a trap. He secured the baggie back in the cavity, replaced the plastic, and pushed the heavy armoire back into place. I stood frozen, the blood draining from my face, my vision tunneling. The embezzlement was secondary now. The man I had loved wasn't just a thief, he was a murderer, or at the very least an accessory to a disappearance. The betrayal wasn't just financial, decisive snap. It was monstrous. "We don't need the other footage," Grizz shut the laptop lid with a, "We have enough for the federal wire fraud charges, but this changes the game. We're going to the FBI in Oklahoma City. Right now, you're not just saving yourself, Emily, you're exposing a killer." My hands, still grasping the empty coffee mug, were shaking violently, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was the cold, hard certainty of vengeance. Starting with the one currently sitting in my hands. Mark was going to pay for every one of his loose ends. The metallic tang of the cheap coffee was still coating my tongue, mixing with the adrenaline. Mark was going to pay for every one of his loose ends, starting with the one currently sitting in my hands. David, his face pale under the harsh fluorescence of the kitchen light in Tulsa, was already mirroring the drive onto 3 separate external hard drives. and encrypted. We don't go to the FBI until every single byte is secured, copied. He disappears, us. David's voice, usually full of cynical bravado, was flat with professional fear. He knew the kind of monster we were dealing with. We spent the next 4 hours creating a digital fortress. My mind, usually prone to spiraling, was terrifyingly focused. Mark was due back from his client meeting. Victim, a euphemism I now knew. I had to be back in the role of his exit strategy, slightly or silencing another before the sun touched the Oklahoma skyline. When David finally slipped out the back door, just before 5 a.m., leaving me with a burner phone and a tiny package of surveillance gear, the silence of the house felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I wiped down every surface he had touched, erasing his temporary presence. Mark valued cleanliness, to execute a superficial veneer over the planting the seed. I took the tiny fiber-optic camera David had engineered into a standard USB wall charger, the kind Mark used religiously for his secondary, encrypted phone. My hands were steady now, driven by a cold purpose that transcended fear. I walked into Mark's perfectly organized home office. The smell of expensive mahogany and his particular brand of citrus cologne almost now felt like a gilded cage, which had plugged the charger into the socket behind his massive desk. It was virtually invisible. I made it back to the bedroom just as I heard the garage door opener whine to life. I was already under the covers, heart hammering against my ribs, feigning sleep. Mark came in smelling faintly of diesel and something sharp, metallic, not blood, but close enough to make my stomach clench. He leaned over the bed, "Honey, you awake?" His shadow engulfing me. His voice was smooth, Emily, a practiced tenor that had charmed investors, judges, and me. I mumbled incoherently, turning away slightly. He kissed the top of my head, a proprietary gesture. "Tough night. Don't worry, baby. Everything is handled. We're safe." Safe. The word was a poisoned dart. For the next 3 days, Mark's behavior was a masterful performance of tension and relief. Abuser's cycle. He was excessively attentive, ordering my favorite takeout, were showing, bringing me. His phone was a permanent extension of his hand. He'd take calls in the office, the door locked, the volume barely a whisper. Before, he'd occasionally leave his work phone on the kitchen counter. Now, if he left the room for a glass of water, the phone was in his pocket. He was paranoid, agitated, but trying desperately to maintain the facade of control. One evening he... "Quiet, Em. Did you talk to anyone today? Did David call again?" David. Mark hated David, my old business partner, seeing him as a threat to his financial and emotional control. Mark had engineered the breakup of our design firm years ago. "No, Mark. Why would David call? We haven't spoken in months." My voice was flat. "Bad news, honey. Perfectly bored. Always looking for shortcuts. The lie felt solid. I worry about you getting pulled into his drama." Mark smiled. I realized but his eyes were calculating. He wasn't just trying to cover his tracks. Good. He was testing my loyalty, ensuring I hadn't made contact with the one person who knew his financial methods well enough to dismantle them. The pressure cooker was building. I hadn't dared access the camera feed during the day. David had warned me. Any unusual network traffic highly could trigger an alert on Mark's. I had to wait for Mark to be truly deeply asleep. The breakthrough came on Thursday night. Mark had been drinking expensive scotch, straight, and had finally succumbed to a heavy, snoring sleep around 2:30 a.m. I slipped out of bed, adrenaline pumping cold through my veins. I retrieved the burner phone hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the hall closet and crept into the darkened guest bathroom, David locking the door behind me. The feed from the USB charger popped up. The office was dimly lit by the pale glow of the streetlights outside. Mark's desk was cluttered with papers, something new. He had been working late. I saw the papers first, thick, legal-looking documents with bold headers. Waiver of liability. Non-disclosure agreement. He was then cleaning house, in his chair, legally isolating himself from his associates, or maybe leaving a voice note. The audio kicked in. The transfer was complete. Faint static at first. "I don't care about the offshore accounts anymore. They can track them. It'll take them years. What matters is the clean break." He paused, a long, ragged sigh. I leaned closer to the phone screen, my heart hammering against the thin ceramic sink basin. She was always going to be the problem. A nerving mixture of frustration clear and casual cruelty. Too soft, too many questions. I told her, stick to the script. But when you start asking about where the money is going, and more importantly, who is getting hurt, that's when you become a liability. I froze. He wasn't talking about a business associate. His tone was intimate, venomous. He was talking about the woman whose face I had seen on David's evidence. Thought she was smarter than me, the woman Mark had murdered and framed as a suicide. Horrific sound. You should have just taken the payout, Sarah. But you pushed. And now you're gone. And I'm still here. Nobody can touch me. Tears streamed silently down my face. But they weren't tears of grief or fear. They were tears of pure, blinding recognition. This wasn't just a man who committed fraud, mocked. This was a psychopath. The camera positioned human lives as inconvenient obstacles to be removed of his desk. Then he pulled out a black leather-bound diary, not the kind for appointments, but a personal journal. He thumbed through the pages, stopping at one entry. His lips moved silently as he read. Then he looked directly at the camera, not because he saw it, but because he was looking at his own reflection in the dark monitor of his computer. Still holding the diary open. You know, the best part about being right is watching them realize how wrong they were, right before they shatter. He closed the diary with a decisive thump. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent bathroom. I quickly stopped the recording, my hands slick with cold sweat. I had the confession, not just the evidence of the crime, but the chilling confirmation of his total lack of remorse, with his premeditated jolt and his dangerous arrogance. Sarah, his employee, I realized with such calculated brutality, he was capable of anything to protect his life with me, the trophy wife, the last piece of his perfect facade. I wasn't safe for another second under his roof. I had to get out now. The FBI in Oklahoma City couldn't wait until morning. I backed up the confession footage onto the burner phone, deleted the source file on the recording device remotely, the devil was wide awake and prepared to run. Drawer. I moved like a ghost through the hallway carpet, the adrenaline burning off the last remnants of fear and leaving behind a cold, clinical focus. My hand brushed the wood of his dresser, a fleeting temptation to look into the drawer, but I suppressed it. Curiosity kills the free. I had the footage, the silver bullet, and that was all I needed. I slipped out the front door of the house anything I took would not tie me back to him. The luxury sedan felt like a coffin on wheels as I sped southeast toward Oklahoma City. Every mile a prayer, every shadow on the road a potential pursuit. When I finally walked into the secure government building downtown, shaking but intact, the relief was so sharp it felt like a physical injury. Agent Ramirez was a calm, 300 pounds of pressure. All it was no longer my secret, my burden. Handing over the burner phone felt like it was evidence. The hours that followed blurred into a surreal mix of interviews and protective measures. Mark Sterling was arrested before dawn, pulled from our bed while he was still sputtering outrage about a corporate misunderstanding. I was placed in a safe house near Tulsa, a bland apartment with thick steel doors and zero windows, in that sterile sound of my own safety that I finally shattered. I didn't cry when I gave the testimony about Sarah. I didn't break when I described Mark's calculated cruelty. I broke when Agent Ramirez brought me a box of clothes, donated, anonymous, generic, because I realized the cashmere sweaters and diamond earrings I'd left behind weren't clothes. They were Mark's uniform for me. I was stripped bare, meticulously not just crafted identity he had imposed. The first 6 months were dedicated to dismantling the lie. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, my therapist, specialized in trauma bonding. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like a prisoner of war who had orchestrated her own escape. We worked on the trophy wife mentality Mark had drilled into me, the belief that my value was dependent on his approval. Dr. Rodriguez said one afternoon, "You didn't just survive physical violence, Clara. You survived psychological demolition. You have to rebuild the foundation, brick by painful brick. We talked about the whispering, the constant self-doubt that told me I was overreacting, that I was the cause of his rage, that I deserved the isolation. It was the same whispering that kept Sarah silent for so long. Was the hardest to recognize that voice. I cut my long, expensive hair short. Not my own intuition. I stopped wearing makeup. I started hiking the small wooded trails near the safe house, feeling the sunlight on my skin for the first time without the oppressive weight of Mark's gaze measuring my perfection. I was finally Clara again, not Mrs. Sterling. The legal process, meanwhile, was a brutal confirmation of everything I had suspected. Mark's lawyers tried to discredit me, greedy wife, the typical play, unstable mind, hysterical woman. But the evidence was ironclad. Not just the footage I provided, but the courage of Sarah, who finally came forward, her voice shaking but steady as she described the full, terrifying extent of his assaults. She was not the only one. 2 other women, former employees who had been paid off and threatened into silence years ago, saw the news of Mark's arrest and found their own resolve. During the trial, the courtroom in Oklahoma City was dissolved. There was no charm, no smooth executive swagger, just pure distilled hatred. It wasn't the look of a man wronged, but a tyrant whose prized possession had turned against him. It was the face of the devil I had spent 10 years sharing a bed with. The gavel struck with a sound that reverberated through my bones, signaling not just the end of the trial, years but the end of my captivity, coercion, and obstruction of justice. Read the sentence, with no possibility of parole, 25, until he was an old, broken man. I didn't look at Mark as they led him away. I looked at Sarah, sitting 2 rows behind me, her hand held tightly by a friend. We shared a nod, a silent acknowledgement that the system, though flawed and slow, had finally delivered. We had done this together. Secure evidence, 2 years of temporary housing in Oklahoma. I still live the financial empire running a small non-profit into legal fees and restitution funds. It's hard work, but it's mine. The phantom weight of Mark's control occasionally tries to settle back on my shoulders, usually when I'm alone in the dark, but now I know how to fight it. I remember the paralyzing fear of that night, but I also remember the moment I pressed record, the isolation, the instant I chose survival over silence, the constant need for control. Know this: the most dangerous time is when you decide to leave, but the most powerful moment is when you gather the proof. They rely on your silence and your shame. They rely on the world thinking they are decent men. Shatter that illusion. You are not crazy. You are not run like weak. Hell toward you the light, a survivor because in the waiting. Silence is not find safety. Your voice. The silence is your prison wall, and you hold the key. Use it.